Guys, after lying for about a year saying inflation is transitory, the Fed is now trying to get people to get used to a new target inflation rate above 2%. Like the inflation is transitory lie, they don't admit it all at once. First, they say, yeah, it's definitely transitory. Everybody knows that. Then, after a few months, they say, it's most likely transitory. Then they get the media pundits that shill for them to write articles and op eds and do interviews talking about how maybe we need to think differently about this, or maybe inflation is sticky. Then, after a year or so, they admit what everybody else has already realized just by shopping in the grocery store. Well, they're doing it again, and this time it is to soften you up to get you used to their inflation target being higher than their normal 2%. They start off by saying, yes, we're totally going to have 2% inflation going forward. After a few months of that, they realize they have to get people prepared for higher inflation. So again, they start using media experts to start writing articles and doing interviews to say why 3% or even 4% might be the new normal. And don't worry, it's not that bad. Remember, if the new normal inflation rate is 3 or even 4%, that means the Fed funds rate has to stay elevated above that, which means that is a headwind for stock valuations. Right now, everyone is assuming we go right back to 2% inflation and lower interest rates and a new bull market in stocks. So let's look at the trial balloons they are putting out there in the media to get people used to the idea of a higher normal inflation rate. It says the Fed needs to raise 2% inflation target or it will crush the economy. Now, do you think he just came up with this on his own, or was he instructed by the Fed to start putting out articles like this? Now, Zero Hedge called this back in June of 2022, and they wrote, at some point, the Fed will concede it has no control over supply. That's when we will start getting leaks of raising the inflation target. And this is the leak, Mohammed El-Arian coming out there. And of course, they're going to have more in the future as well. So Obama's former economic advisor, Jason Furman, says, to bring price increases down to 2%, we may need to tolerate unemployment of 6.5% for 2 years. In other words, keeping the inflation rate at higher than 2% is going to save us from the 6.5% unemployment rate that we're going to face if we try to keep this at 2%. So what's his solution? Well, here it is. We're stabilizing at 3% inflation rate is probably healthier for the economy than stabilizing at 2%. So while fighting inflation should be the central bank's only focus today, at some point the Fed should reassess the meaning of a victory in that struggle. So you see how they phrase it? 2% is going to give us 6.5% unemployment, but 3% is much healthier for the economy. And 3% is actually going to be the new meaning of a victory in the inflation struggle, according to the Fed. So here he says, on a blank slate, a 3% target would be better than a 2% target, but shifting to that could de-anchor expectations. And what that means is everybody in the market is expecting that we're going to go back to a 2% normal. When they see that that doesn't happen, the market is going to have to reprice for that new normal information. And so he's saying if the Fed doesn't rise from its 2% target, then 6.5% unemployment rate in 2024, which would translate to no less than 10.8 million unemployed workers, an 80% increase from the 6 million today. So you see how they try to frame it? They say, hey, you know, this 2% is bad. We're going to save you from having this unemployment by doing 3%. And once you get used to that for 3 or 4 months, they're going to start talking about, well, maybe 3.5% is the new normal. And so you see another expert, Goldman Sachs, got on board and said, given that most would agree that a fast reduction in inflation to 2% is unlikely, we can now have a debate whether raising the G10 inflation target to the 3 to 4% range is more optimal for reasons of maintaining employment levels or public debt sustainability than the 2% goal, which would not be possible if inflation was sticky in the 6 to 10% range. And so Mohammed El Arian told Bloomberg that the Fed won't be able to get US inflation down to its 2% target without crushing the economy. So you see, they frame it in a way that we're saving you from crushing the economy by going to the 3 or 4% range. Here he says you need a higher stable inflation rate, call it 3 to 4%. I don't think they can get CPI to 2% without crushing the economy, but that's because 2% is not the right target. February 21st, the Fed just hinted that the new inflation target will be 2.8%. And so to signal that message, Jerome Powell used his person in the Wall Street Journal that he leaks whatever he wants to leak to the market, Nick Timiraos, which they call Nicky Leaks now. He flagged a report by Cleveland Fed researchers who said that the Fed's economic forecast is wrong and either inflation will be too high or unemployment. Specifically, the Fed projected that the FOMC's unemployment rate path brings core PCE inflation to 2.75 by 2025. So here he says the researchers also include that if 2.8% inflation doesn't result in an unanchoring of inflation expectations, the December FOMC projection, in which inflation stays somewhat above the 2% target for longer, would be the optimal policy. So you see, they're already getting people used to that 2.8 to 3% for the next few years by having these experts go on all these news programs and op-eds and whatever and put those ideas in people's minds to get them used to it. And of course, they make these models based on what they want to project to everybody in the market. So if the market is still working on the assumption that we're going back to a 2% normal inflation rate, it is going to be in for a pretty big surprise when that doesn't happen. And even with the Fed raising interest rates, the real interest rates are still negative. And don't forget, anytime the CPI has risen above 5%, the Fed had to raise the Fed funds rates above that inflation rate to get inflation back down. So right now, the Fed funds rate is in the 4s. To crush inflation, they're going to have to get it above the CPI level, or the CPI level is going to have to fall lower. So if the CPI is sticky and that's not happening, that only means one thing: rates are going to have to go higher. So guys, don't believe what they say, just watch what they do by putting these little bits of information out there with all their so-called experts out there in the media. And this type of manipulation doesn't just happen with the Fed. The government builds artificial consensus by using the media to push out their talking points. And it's a well-known fact that when you hear something from 3 or more sources, then you tend to believe that it is true. So be aware when they are pushing these narratives out to you.